She purrs only for him, nobody knows why. Mason sat alone, hunched at the main console, fingers tapping absently at the touchpad. His unshaven jaw caught the shifting colors of the hollow screens, blue and green numbers flickering across his weathered features. The recycled air, tinged with the metallic tang of ozone and a persistent undercurrent of moss, filled his lungs as he exhaled a tired sigh. Data scrolled by, a chorus of chemical signatures and resonance maps, but Mason's gaze strayed, drifting to the viewport. Outside, beyond layers of reinforced polyglass, Arden's alien rainforest rippled and breathed with phosphorescent life. Pulses of deep cerulean light shimmered through the thick undergrowth, making the shadows dance and twist. Somewhere in the tangled blue-green foliage, something large moved, a barely perceptible shift, but Mason's eyes caught it. His voice, low and thoughtful, threaded through the silence. 400 days, he murmured, the words almost lost beneath the soft hum of machines. That's how long Arden has been my refuge. The words sounded both like a confession and a benediction. In his mind, he finished the thought. I left behind the politics of Earth's research circles, trading their derision for the honest silence of alien flora. Here, my theories on resonance ecology are more than speculation. Plants don't care about reputations. They simply exist. He dictated a note into his log, voice clipped but precise. Biostation log, day 400. Night humidity approaching saturation. Flora responding to pressure fronts with increased bioluminescence. No new animal signatures since last survey. But as he spoke, a flashing orange icon interrupted the data stream. A motion alert. Mason's posture changed instantly. He tapped the feed, pulling up a split screen of infrared and regular video from the perimeter cams. The air outside glowed with the coming storm, thick clouds swirling overhead. His soil analyzer, left out on the west grid, was gone. The anchor cord hung limp, snapped clean as a bone. He leaned forward, tension tight in his shoulders. On the flickering screen, something darted past. A cobalt blue blur, almost too fast to register. The station's AI intoned flatly. Sensor anomaly detected. Possible camera malfunction. Not a malfunction, Mason muttered, narrowing his eyes. Something's out there. Dusk bled into night as thunder rolled above the canopy. Mason moved outside, boots squelching in the damp soil, eyes scanning for signs. The missing analyzer left a ragged gap in the mud. He crouched, fingers brushing the severed cord, edges smooth and sharp. No animal he knew could slice synthetic fiber like that. He turned, ears prickling, certain he was being watched. A sudden metallic alarm shrieked behind him. Mason spun, adrenaline surging. The biostation's airlock sensors flashed a bright, insistent red. Contamination detected. He sprinted back, heart pounding. At the security window, mist swirled in the sterile antechamber, obscuring the shape within. Mason grabbed a containment baton from its magnetic holster, thumbed the scanner, and peered through the glass. At first he saw only motion. Then, through the haze, she emerged, a tall, striking figure, feline yet unmistakably sentient. Cobalt blue fur gleamed in the harsh lights, each muscle in her frame tensed for action. Her armor, forged from some dark, iridescent metal, hugged her limbs and torso, etched with unfamiliar symbols. Long ears flicked, alert. A thick tail, striped with midnight, twitched in agitation. Her eyes, crimson, unblinking, locked onto Mason's. He steadied his breathing and lifted the scanner, blue light pulsing as it swept her. The figure bared her teeth in a snarl, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. In a blur of motion, she lashed out with a clawed hand. The scanner shattered, plastic and circuitry scattering. Mason froze, baton raised, but his grip loosened. He swallowed, then slowly lowered the weapon, hands open in surrender. Easy, he whispered. "I'm not your enemy." For a long, tense heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with feline grace, she slipped into the corridor's shadow, vanishing without a sound. The days that followed blurred together in a series of repairs and silent negotiations. Mason worked in the dim light, patching together what the alien had broken. But the automated defenses remained off. Instead, he left ration bars by the airlock, plain, utilitarian food, packed with calories and little else. The first morning, the bars disappeared. No tracks, no sign except for the lingering scent of wild earth. Mason watched the tree line through a cracked lens, and for a heartbeat, caught a flash of blue fur. He named her Lyra, Dawn, after the way she moved, half glimpsed, half shadow. At night, he spoke softly into his secret log, voice barely audible. "The most remarkable thing, when I'm close, hidden in the brush, she purrs. Not like the drones, she bristles at them. But my presence brings out something gentle. Resonance, maybe. Or trust." He catalogued her gifts: a feather left on his stoop, a scrap of woven fiber, the odd arrangement of stones near his water tank. He left her food, tools, anything that might say peace in a language of small exchanges. Then one night, a storm battered the outpost. Rain hammered the polyglass, winds howling through the trees. Mason barely slept. When dawn finally broke, he spotted her through the viewport. Lyra, drenched, her cobalt fur clinging to her muscular frame, shivering in the chill. He took a thermal wrap from the supply locker and, without a word, placed it on a stump outside the airlock. Then he retreated, watching from the shadows. Later, the wrap was gone. In its place, on the steps, a cluster of luminous berries glowed softly, an offering, alien and beautiful. Mason glanced up to the trees and found her there, curled into herself, cocooned in the warmth he'd offered. For the first time, her eyes closed in sleep. A fragile trust began, silent, tentative, but real. Mason's priorities shifted in ways he'd never predicted, as if something fundamental inside him had reoriented overnight. Data logs and experiments still filled the hours, but now his focus orbited a new center: Lyra. She was everywhere in his thoughts, a magnetic presence even in her absence. The daily rituals of scientific routine became laced with anticipation. Would she appear today? Would she accept the gift he left, or grace him with her presence on the edge of the clearing? He documented it all, but his notes had changed. No longer just cold observation, they brimmed with questions and wonder. Mason first noticed the plants near the airlock. Spindly blue vines, normally slow to grow, had doubled in size in just a few days. He cross-referenced his sensor logs, and a pattern emerged. Every spike in Lyra's presence, especially when she lingered near him, coincided with bursts of accelerated plant growth. He watched, amazed, as her purr, sometimes so low he could feel it through his boots, sent subtle tremors through the soil, coaxing blossoms open and coaxing tendrils upward. In the evenings, Mason began a new ritual. He brought a battered reader outside, settled himself on the mossy step just beyond the airlock, and read aloud. Sometimes he chose ecology treatises, passages about symbiosis and feedback loops, but other nights he reached for old novels, the words tumbling softly into the dusk. And though the earth was strange beneath her feet, she found comfort in the rhythm of growing things. He intoned, voice rough but gentle. Lyra, half concealed behind a fern, listened intently. Each sentence seemed to deepen her resonance. Her purr became a thrumming undertone, vibrating the air, as if she were tuning herself to the sound of his voice. When he paused, she would shift, making a small, encouraging trill. He felt the connection, a circuit closed by word and breath, and something older, deeper than language. Sometimes, as he read, a flower would open at his feet, its petals glowing faintly in the blue Arden twilight. Mason couldn't help but smile. One steamy afternoon, with the air heavy and close, Mason set out to trace the path Lyra often took when she slipped away into the forest. He equipped himself with a compact field kit, a vial of antifungal spray, and a small digital recorder, but his heart beat with a different kind of excitement. The trail was almost invisible, a narrow ribbon in the dense undergrowth, marked here and there by deep impressions where something large and nimble had passed. He moved with care, brushing aside veils of mist, ducking beneath massive leaves. Suddenly, the foliage parted, and he found himself standing on the edge of a hidden glade. Steam curled from a cluster of crystalline pools, a hot spring, secret and undisturbed. The air shimmered above the water's surface, refracting rainbows. Lyra was there, crouched on a flat stone, dipping her hands into the water. Her blue fur was slicked down, accentuating the muscular lines of her back and shoulders. Water ran in rivulets along her flanks, tracing every curve. For a moment, Mason forgot to breathe. He watched, transfixed, as she plunged into the pool, surfacing with a flick of her ears and a contented growl. A branch snapped under Mason's foot. Lyra turned, eyes sharp and brilliant. Their gazes locked, and Mason felt the old tension return. But she did not flee. Instead, she lifted her chin, water streaming down her fur, and watched him with unblinking curiosity. Then, with a sly, almost playful flick of her hand, she sent a spray of water in his direction. Mason grinned, the gesture unmistakable, a wordless invitation. He sat on the edge of the pool, letting the steam envelop him, the charged silence between them thick with possibility. From that day, Lyra no longer hid. She made herself visible at the perimeter of the clearing, sometimes crouched in the branches, sometimes sitting openly in the moss, tail flicking in rhythm to Mason's movements. He felt her gaze on him as he worked, steady and reassuring. Her purr was a constant now, a gentle, grounding vibration that wove itself through his thoughts, soothing and invigorating all at once. Their days settled into a rhythm. Mason would wake early, prepping samples, logging atmospheric readings. Lyra would appear at sunrise, her silhouette limned in blue light, and watch him quietly. Sometimes she'd mimic his actions, poking at a datapad with a stick or turning over rocks in search of insects. When he spoke, she listened, her head cocked, learning the cadence of his speech. Occasionally she would echo a word, mangled but recognizable, and his laughter would draw her closer. One morning, as pale light filtered through the canopy, Lyra beckoned him with a tilt of her head and a gentle wave of her hand. Mason grabbed his kit, boots crunching over the damp leaves, and followed. Her stride was easy, sure-footed over treacherous ground. They plunged into the rainforest, the air thick with the scent of resin and blooming pollen. Lyra led the way, but Mason called out soft warnings. "Left, Lyra. Carnivorous spores on that branch." She hesitated, then skirted the danger, glancing back in acknowledgement. At a narrow ravine, she reached back, fingers brushing his wrist as she guided him across. The touch lingered, electric. Their teamwork was seamless, an unspoken dance of protection and guidance. When Lyra stumbled into a snare of wiry vines, she snarled in frustration, but Mason was there in a heartbeat, slicing the tendrils free with his utility knife. "You're all right," he murmured, brushing leaves from her shoulder. Lyra turned, nuzzling his hand in gratitude, her purr a warm vibration against his palm. A moment later, Mason stopped her from stepping into a pit concealed beneath a mat of roots. He placed a steadying hand at her waist, pulling her back. Their eyes met, and something passed between them: respect, gratitude, and the budding promise of something more. They moved on, steps falling into perfect sync, silence filled with shared breaths. The forest grew denser, shadows deepening. Bioluminescent vines coiled overhead, casting ghostly light. Eventually, The path opened into a secluded basin, the air charged with anticipation. At its heart stood something Mason had only glimpsed in fever dreams. A massive crystalline organism, its facets refracting light in every hue, veins of color pulsing faintly beneath its surface. Lyra drew him close, her purr rising in intensity, making the very air tremble. Mason could feel the resonance deep in his chest, a pressure building, drawing him forward as if by invisible threads. "Lyra?" he whispered, breathless. "What is this?" She pressed against him, guiding his hand to the Cylon's surface. The crystal was cool and impossibly smooth, yet he felt a current, alive, waiting. "Listen," Lyra murmured, her voice a growl interwoven with the purr. She pressed her brow to his shoulder, urging him on. Compelled, Mason laid his palm flat on the Cylon. In that instant, Lyra's body molded against his, her purr surging to a pitch that set the crystal humming. The air vibrated, the world blurred. A torrent of vision crashed through Mason's mind, fragments of memory not his own. Lyra's kind, once numerous, gathered around the Cylon in reverence, the Cylon pulsing with psychic light, binding their tribe together in wordless unity. Then, catastrophe. Fire from the sky, a shockwave of silence. The Cylon dimmed, the tribe vanished, and Lyra, newborn and untested, left alone in the aftermath, destined to guard the crystal's slumber. He understood, suddenly, the ache in her gaze, the loneliness that resonated beneath her courage. The Cylon needed something it had lost. An outside frequency, a biofield unlike any native to Arden. Mason's own presence, his energy, was the missing note. Lyra's purr had been the call. He was the answer, the key to waking the Cylon and restoring the pulse of her people. Mason staggered back, the vision fading, his hand trembling. Lyra steadied him, her eyes shining with hope and fear. For the first time, he sensed the enormity of what lay between them, something ancient, necessary, and profoundly intimate. The Cylon shimmered, waiting. Lyra's purr wrapped around him, a promise and a plea. He closed his eyes, took a steadying breath, and stepped closer, ready to answer. Mason staggered back from the Cylon, lungs burning with the weight of memory and revelation. The crystalline organism still pulsed beneath his fingertips, but now its light was echoed in Lyra's eyes, alive with hope and fear. She stood close, shoulders squared in solemn pride. It was as if, only now, Mason truly saw her, not just as the enigmatic alien at the forest's edge, but as the bearer of something sacred, ancient, and heartbreakingly solitary. He reached for her, cupping her face and shaking hands, his thumbs tracing the lines where blue fur met the cold metal of her armor. "I understand," he whispered, voice hoarse but sure. The words bridged the gulf between worlds. Lyra's purr deepened, a sound layered with questions and relief. She tilted her head, pressing her cheek into his palm. In the electric hush, Mason felt an emotion flow between them. Safety, wonder, a fierce affection that needed no translation. He pressed his forehead to hers, closing his eyes, and let the resonance of her purr fill his chest. She drew back just enough to meet his gaze, eyes flickering with intelligence and something softer. Her body language mirrored his own, the gentle incline of her head, the sweep of her tail around his legs. She placed her hand over his heart, claws sheathed, and Mason covered it with his own. For a moment, neither moved. Words felt unnecessary. Everything vital passed through the space between their hands, their breath, the subtle music of her voice. That night, Mason returned to the grove with a small music player, its surface battered from years of travel. He set it on a rock beside the Cylon, fingers trembling as he cued up a gentle violin piece. Soft notes spilled into the night, weaving through the air like a living thing. Lyra tensed at first, ears flat, eyes darting between Mason and the strange machine. But as the melody deepened, swelling and falling in slow, yearning arcs, her wariness melted. She stepped closer, purr rising and falling in rhythm with the music. Mason held out his hand, palm open in invitation. Lyra hesitated only a moment before placing her clawed fingers into his, her touch both delicate and fierce. They moved together, slow and uncertain at first, feet tracing small circles in the moss. Mason guided her gently, his other hand resting lightly at her waist. Lyra followed his lead, her head settling against his chest, her purr blending with the music. With every step, their bodies adjusted, fitting together as if made for this moment. Mason's heart thudded against her cheek, and he wondered if she could feel its wild, hopeful beat. The song faded into silence, but neither of them stopped. Mason lifted her chin, searching her eyes for permission. Lyra's answer was wordless, a brush of her nose against his, the slow closing of her crimson eyes. He kissed her, slow and deep. Lyra melted into him, the last barrier between them dissolving. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, claws tracing patterns along his back, not in threat, but in devotion. Mason poured all his longing, gratitude, and awe into the kiss, feeling her purr echo between their lips. A sudden roar split the night, shattering the fragile cocoon they'd woven. The music player clattered from the stone as the ground trembled. Lyra sprang away from Mason, fur bristling, every muscle coiled and ready. Through the trees, searchlights cut blazing arcs, the unmistakable glare of human technology. The Helix Industries vessel descended with a scream of engines, scattering terrified birds into the sky. Armed patrols in black armor spilled from the ship's open maw, fanning out in precise formation. Drones zipped through the canopy, their red sensors gleaming as they sliced through vines and brush. Bark split beneath their boots, and the scent of scorched ozone filled the air. Lyra hissed, crouched low, eyes narrowed with hatred and fear. Her tail lashed the earth, and Mason recognized the spark of violence in her posture. She was ready to attack, to defend the Cylon and her world with tooth and claw. He stepped between her and the invaders, voice urgent but gentle. "No, Lyra. We survive. Together." She glared, pupils slitted, but Mason's calm steadied her. He pressed her hand in his, a silent promise. Her purr vibrated with new tension, but she nodded. They slipped into the shadows, Mason guiding her through the labyrinthine forest. He drew on everything he'd learned in 400 days, the language of Arden's flora, the deadly traps hidden in plain sight. Lyra moved ahead, a blur of blue fur and dark metal, every sense attuned to the hunt. Mason worked quickly, collecting explosive seeds from the red-stalked cinder vines, loading them into hollowed logs with trembling hands. Lyra darted through the undergrowth, setting snares from thorned creepers, weaving venomous vines into the patrol's path. When the first squad stumbled into a spore cloud, they fell coughing and blinded, stumbling over one another as Lyra darted in and out, silent and lethal. "Keep moving," barked a soldier, voice tinny over the comms. Mason watched from the shadows, heart pounding as fear spread among the ranks. The invaders grew jumpy, firing into the dark, every shadow a threat. Mason and Lyra became phantoms, never still, always striking from unexpected angles. Their greatest weapon was not brute force, but fear itself. Helix's drones crashed into sticky webs, their rotors jammed with pollen. A patrol vanished in the mists, only to reappear hours later, delirious from inhaling hallucinogenic spores. As the night wore on, the defenders whittled down the enemy. Finally, the last squad, led by a commander with hard eyes and a sneer, forced their way into the Cylon's grove. They marched in a tight wedge, pulse rifles raised, helmets gleaming in the psychic glow. Mason and Lyra stood together before the Cylon, united and unyielding. The commander leveled his weapon, voice amplified by his suit. Step aside, or we'll take what we want by force. Lyra tensed, ready to spring. Mason placed a steadying hand on her arm, meeting her gaze. Trust me, he whispered, voice barely audible. She hesitated, then nodded, pressing her forehead to his for a fleeting instant, a pledge of faith. Mason faced the Cylon, Lyra at his side. He drew her close, arms circling her as if to shield her from the world. He let himself feel everything: love, hope, the unbreakable bond they'd forged. He pressed his palm to the Cylon, channeling his feelings into the crystal. Lyra's purr rose and rose, amplifying his intent, their energies weaving into a living circuit. The Cylon erupted in light, a dazzling psychic radiance that shattered the night. Waves of memory and emotion surged out, engulfing the soldiers. They staggered, weapons falling from numb hands, faces contorted with awe, terror, and grief. In an instant, they were forced to live Lyra's loneliness, Mason's longing, the beauty and pain of Arden itself. The Helix ship powered up in a panic, its crew scrambling as the psychic assault crashed through their minds. The vessel blasted skyward, trailing sparks, its human cargo broken and defeated. Silence fell over the grove, save for the fading echoes of the Cylon's song. Mason held Lyra, her purr trembling with relief. The night air shimmered around them, heavy with promise and the weight of all they had survived, together. The Cylon glowed with a new electric vitality, its crystalline body radiating waves of luminous color into the dark. Spores drifted on the cool night wind, shimmering like fireflies as they spiraled upward, caught in invisible currents. All around the grove, the forest responded. Dormant shoots unfurled, ancient mosses thickened, and the battered canopy seemed to exhale in relief. Mason stood in the center of it all, holding Lyra close, her purr a gentle thrum against his chest, as steady as a heartbeat. He pressed his lips to her brow, inhaling the unique scent of her fur, fresh moss, spice, something uniquely Arden. The glow of the Cylon painted their skin and fur with shifting hues, blue and gold and violet. Mason's thoughts swirled with possibility and consequence. Helix Industries would regroup, hungry for what they could not possess. If he told the truth, Arden might be saved for a time, but at what cost? Humanity's greed was a fire that would not be so easily extinguished. Lyra looked up, her crimson eyes searching his. "You're troubled," she said softly, her voice low, melodic, accented with the song of her people. Her tail curled around his waist, anchoring him in the present. He nodded, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "I have to make a choice," he murmured. "The world will want to know what happened here. They'll come back, unless I convince them Arden is too dangerous to touch." Lyra's gaze did not falter. "Would you lie? For us?" There was no judgment in her question, only understanding. Mason hesitated, feeling the weight of all that had come before, the loneliness of his exile, the joy of finding Lyra, the terror of nearly losing it all. "I would do anything," he said at last. "For you. For this place." He returned to the biostation, systems still humming beneath their layers of moss and lichen. The final report for Helix blinked on the cracked console. Request for status, casualty figures, environmental assessment. Mason stared at the cursor, then began to type. He filled the log with warnings. Arden's environment is unstable. Catastrophic storms, unbreathable air, predatory fauna, no sustainable resource found. All previous data lost. Recommend Arden be quarantined indefinitely. He attached falsified atmospheric samples, corrupted memory files, a doctored video loop showing only storm-racked wilderness and static. When he was done, he hit send. The signal arced skyward, carrying the lie that would keep Arden hidden, at least for a while. Mason shut down the transmitter for good, His old life, with its endless debates and hungry ambition, was over. He stepped outside, the air alive with new music. The biostation was no longer a fortress, but a part of the living world. Technology and nature had fused, solar cells woven into vine canopies, filtration systems disguised as flowering bushes, drones hollowed out for nesting birds. He found Lyra waiting beneath the Cylon, arms open. "You came back," she whispered, pulling him into her embrace. "I have nowhere else," he replied. "This is my home." They built their new life at the crystal's base, their sleeping space nestled in luminous moss. Each night they curled together, Lyra's body pressed against his, her purr weaving a cocoon of safety around them. On the third morning, as dawn painted the grove with silver light, Mason noticed a faint glow at the Cylon's roots, a tiny crystal sprout, its facets catching the sunrise. He dropped to his knees, awe washing through him. "Lyra, look." She knelt beside him, eyes wide. "It is the first in centuries. The Cylon remembers." Mason reached for her hand, and together they cradled the sprout, a fragile promise of a new beginning. Years unfurled, measured not in days but in the slow, miraculous growth of the Cylon sprouts and the shifting constellations of glowing fungi above the treetops. The old biostation had long since shed its metallic skin, reclaimed by vines and roots. It had become a living structure, walls of woven branches, windows grown from transparent resin, solar panels entwined with flowering creepers. Every invention Mason had ever loved was here, but transformed, made gentle by Arden's touch. Lyra was no longer a wild, wary guardian, but the heart of this world. She wore simple garments woven from soft fibers, her movements graceful and sure. She spoke Mason's language now, her voice a soothing melody, each word colored by her native cadence. But the psychic resonance between them was the truest speech, one that required no words at all. Mason spent his mornings with the Cylon sprouts, measuring their growth with a gentle hand, tracking the spread of their light through the forest. At night, he and Lyra sat beneath the stars, tracing patterns in the sky, sharing silent stories through touch and memory. One morning, sunlight dappled through the lattice of leaves, painting the lab in gold and green. Lyra entered quietly, carrying a bowl of fruit, sweet jeweled berries, tart and bright. She set the bowl beside his microscope, then wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her purr blooming in his ears. He leaned back into her embrace, covering her hands with his own. "You spoil me," he teased. She nuzzled his neck, her tail curling around his leg. "You deserve it. You keep the sprouts happy." He turned, catching her mouth in a practiced, intimate kiss. She laughed softly, the sound vibrating between them. "That's not the only thing that makes them grow," she whispered, tracing the line of his jaw. Their happiness was more than emotion. It fed the Cylon's psychic network, sending ripples of contentment through the grove. Mason could feel it, a subtle hum in the air, the forest responding to every shared smile, every quiet laugh. He pulled her into his lap, letting his fingers wander the patterns in her fur. Their passion was not the wildfire of first discovery, but a steady, glowing flame, always present, flaring with a single touch. Lyra gazed into his eyes, a smile playing at her lips. "The sprouts are calling," she murmured. "They want to feel your song." Mason grinned, scooping her up effortlessly. "Then let's not keep them waiting." They stepped into the grove, the ambient hum rising in greeting. The Cylon and its new sprouts shimmered, their crystalline bodies echoing the rhythm of Mason's heartbeat, the cadence of Lyra's purr. They lay together in the luminous moss, hands entwined, the air saturated with memory and sensation. Mason let himself fall into the psychic current, sharing the memory of their first meeting, the fear and wonder, the first hesitant words, the slow unraveling of trust. Lyra received each moment as lived experience, eyes shining with recognition. She returned to him the sorrow of her ancient loneliness, the joy of finding him, the hope she felt with every new dawn. He sensed her brush against his mind, finding the ache that lingered, a small persistent sadness for the world he'd left behind. She cradled his face, drawing him close. "You are my home now," Mason whispered, voice thick with gratitude. Their bodies entwined, fitting together with the ease of long familiarity. The Sprouts' chorus swelled, a song of unity and promise, as the forest flourished around them, rooted not just in Arden's soil, but in the love they'd made eternal. Later, the Cylon Grove shimmered in tranquil blue, the night thick with the perfume of blooming moss and the low resonance of psychic song. Mason lay on his back, Lyra curled beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. Through the canopy, the stars glimmered, some steady, some drifting. He traced the arc of one that moved against the current, a tiny, artificial beacon threading silently across the sky. He felt a flicker in his chest, a longing he hadn't expected. The satellite was a pale relic of the world he'd left behind, Earth's cold ambitions, its science, its distance. Mason's breath hitched, and he tried to blink the ache away. Lyra stirred, her purr faltering. She lifted her head, eyes glinting with concern. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice a gentle rumble. Mason smiled, brushing her cheek with his knuckles. "Just a memory," he said. "Nothing more. I belong here, Lyra. You and Arden. You've made me a caretaker of living worlds." Her purr grew stronger, resonating through his chest, anchoring him to the present. She nestled closer, and the old ache faded into something softer. Gratitude. Peace. Suddenly, the Cylon's song shifted. The harmonies fractured, a discordant note slicing through the tranquil night. Lyra stiffened, ears pinned back, a low moan trembling in her throat. Mason sat up, alarm racing down his spine. "What is it?" Lyra pressed her hands to the moss, closing her eyes. "There's pain. Far away, a wound in the land," she shuddered. "A blight, spreading. I feel it inside the song." Mason sprang to his feet, moving quickly to the biostation's interface. He brought up the orbital scans, fingers flying across the ancient controls. Recent telemetry lit the screen, a new scar in Arden's skin, a swirling plume of toxins, the signature unmistakable. "Helix," Mason breathed, horror dawning in his gut. When they fled, their deep core probe must have crashed. It's poisoning the land. His fists clenched. He felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. All his choices, the ripples of what he'd done. "I should have checked," he whispered. "This is my fault." Lyra was beside him, fierce and unyielding. "No," she said, voice sharp with conviction. "We survived them once. We'll heal this, together." Their resolve became a bond, pulsing between them. Mason packed his field kit, scanners, respirators, containment vials, and Lyra gathered what medicines she could, her claws shaking. They set out before dawn, the Cylon's song guiding them as far as it could. They traveled for hours, slipping between the trees, the forest growing quieter with every step. At last, the lush, vibrant canopy gave way to a blighted wasteland. Trees stood dead and skeletal, bark peeling, roots exposed like broken bones. The air tasted metallic, heavy with poison. The psychic hum was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching silence. Lyra winced, clutching her head. "It hurts," she gasped, her voice thin. "The song is silent here." "I can't!" Mason caught her as she stumbled. "Stay back," he said softly. "Let me go ahead. I'll fix this, I promise." She met his gaze, her eyes fierce and wet. "I'll wait for you, but don't forget." Her claws brushed his jaw, a whisper of reassurance. "You are never alone." Mason pressed a kiss to her forehead, then turned toward the heart of the blight. The probe site was a wound in the earth, metal and plastic strewn among blackened ash. At the center, the helix drill stood twisted and shrieking, its motor keening as it bored mindlessly into the poisoned ground. Slick sludge oozed from ruptured tanks, seeping into the soil, killing everything it touched. The stench made Mason's eyes water. He donned his respirator, knelt beside the probe, and began to work. First, he cataloged the toxins, heavy metals, acid byproducts, mutagenic solvents. The probe's core was still active, sending tremors through the dying land. He searched for a solution, something fast, decisive. His gaze landed on a patch of acid-secreting pitcher plants, their roots stubbornly green even in the blight. Mason grinned, hope flaring. He gathered a bundle of their leaves, sliced them open, and dripped the potent sap onto the exposed power core. The acid hissed, eating into the metal, but the core remained. He scanned the ground, searching for a second answer. In a rotting log, he found what he needed: a colony of iron-consuming fungus, its tendrils glistening silver. Mason scraped a handful into a containment pouch, then smeared the spores across the core and into the drill's gears. The effect was immediate. The fungus spread in fractal patterns, devouring metal, short-circuiting the probe's machinery. The drill's scream became a choking cough, then silence. The toxic sludge slowed, then stopped. The psychic static ebbed, replaced by a cautious hush. Mason staggered back, exhausted. He tore off his mask, breathing in the acrid air, and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then, from beneath the ash, a single green shoot pushed upward, trembling with the effort of new life. He laughed, tears stinging his eyes. "Come on," he whispered. "You can do it." Behind him, he heard a cry. Lyra's voice, raw with hope. She ran to him, heedless of the lingering toxins, and threw herself into his arms. Her purr returned, tentative at first, then swelling as she pressed her forehead to his. "You did it," she breathed. "I felt the pain lift." All around them, tiny shoots pierced the ash, leaves unfurling in slow, victorious spirals. The air shimmered with possibility. From the distant Silent Grove, a single chime rang out, clear, bell-like. A moment later, it was answered by another, and another, until the sprouts across Arden sang in unison. Mason held Lyra tightly, their bodies trembling with relief and joy. Her purr joined the swelling chorus, no longer alone, but woven into the harmony of Arden's first true song. Dawn spilled over the Silent Grove, soft and golden, bathing Arden in a light that seemed almost sentient. The forest breathed and thrived, every leaf humming with the energy of the awakened Cylon. Vines and luminous mosses climbed the structure that had once been a sterile research outpost, blurring the line between technology and nature. The biostation now pulsed with life, its walls grown thick with green and blue, windows dappled by the shifting canopy. Where once there had been the cold hum of machinery, now there was the gentle thrum of the living world, Mason and Lyra at its vibrant heart. They woke entwined, arms and tails and legs tangled in soft moss and woven blankets. Lyra stirred first, stretching with feline grace, her blue fur catching the morning light. She rolled toward Mason, her purr already vibrating through their shared space. He reached out, drawing her close, and she pressed a kiss to his neck, her tail curling possessively around his thigh. They moved together in easy intimacy, practiced and unhurried. The world outside their door was a living paradise, flowers blooming, sprouts singing, the silent psychic music weaving through their senses. Their partnership had become the axis on which the world turned, lovers, friends, creators, caretakers. There was no longer any part of Mason that felt like an exile, and Lyra was no longer a lone guardian on the edge of extinction. Later that morning, Lyra slipped from their bed and padded quietly to the lab. She returned with a bowl of jewel-bright fruit, fat berries and sweet glowing slices, nestled in her arms. Mason sat hunched over his notes, scribbling observations about the new silent sprouts and their exponential growth. She set the bowl beside him, then wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her purr rising to a playful crescendo. He leaned into her, closing his eyes for a moment. "You always know what I need," he said, voice rough with affection. She nuzzled his jaw, laughter rippling through her purr. "You are easy to read, beloved." Her tail wound around his leg, anchoring him to the moment. "The sky flowers are blooming early," she added. "The Cylon feels your peace." Mason grinned, setting down his notes. "Then let's go show them what happiness really looks like." He scooped her up, delighting in her surprised yelp, and carried her out into the grove. The sprouts, crystalline and luminous, bent gently in their direction, their psychic chorus rising in greeting. Moss glowed beneath their feet, cool and soft, welcoming them home. They lay together in the moss, letting the world fall away. Lyra rested her head on his chest, her purr syncing perfectly with the Cylon's song. Mason tangled his fingers in her fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. They opened their minds, sharing everything, memories of joy and sorrow, the ache of loneliness past, the ecstasy of finding one another in a universe of chance. Lyra whispered, her voice threading through his thoughts. "You changed the song. Before, it was only longing. Now it is full." He pressed his lips to her brow, his hands smoothing the patterns in her fur. "You gave me purpose," he replied. "This world needed you, but I needed you more." She shifted, moving so her eyes met his, deep, crimson, and shining. "We made Arden new," she said. "Science and song, logic and instinct. The Cylon would have faded if not for you. I would have faded too." He smiled, brushing his thumb over her cheek. "We remade each other." Their bond was no longer just passion, but a fusion of everything they were: human ingenuity and feline instinct, science and emotion, art and nature. Mason's knowledge of Earth's technology had been changed by Arden's wild logic, shaped by Lyra's perspective. He had designed new sensors that grew like roots, devised medicines that sang to the Cylon's rhythm, and every innovation was tested by Lyra's wisdom, her ability to sense what the world needed most. The forest flourished, every creature attuned to the harmony Mason and Lyra created. The sprouts glowed brighter when they were near, the psychic network amplifying not just survival, but happiness. Arden itself became their creation, their home, their shared legacy. As the sun climbed higher, the grove warmed, and they lay together, sharing wordless dreams. Mason remembered Earth sometimes, its cold skies, its silent forests, its endless hunger, but the ache was gone. Lyra sensed every shadow of regret, and each time she soothed it with touch and song, giving him memories of her own, the loneliness of centuries, the miracle of renewal, the hope that had once seemed impossible. He pulled her close, tracing the swirls of color on her back. "I was nothing before you," he murmured. "A ghost in my own life. Now—" He paused, overwhelmed. "Now I'm the gardener of worlds." She smiled, claws kneading the moss. "You are more. You are my mate, my song, my future. Arden sings because of you." They made love in the moss, slow and complete, their passion a steady fire that never faded. The Cylon's light bent around them, catching every sigh and shiver, and the sprout's chorus swelled, a harmony of sensation and spirit. After, they rested in each other's arms, the world at peace. Mason felt whole for the first time, a man no longer haunted by exile or doubt, but anchored in love and purpose. He closed his eyes, listening to the planet's music, the fusion of his own joy, Lyra's purr, and the Cylon's endless song. Lyra shifted, brushing her lips across his ear. "We are forever," she whispered. "You have healed my loneliness. My legacy is safe. He tightened his embrace, heart echoing her vow. We did this. Together. Above them, Arden's sky flowers bloomed, scattering petals like stars. The Cylon's energy pulsed, vibrant and alive. All around, the planet sang, a new anthem, born from two souls entwined, a harmony that would never fade. Mason and Lyra lay among the glowing sprouts, their love the heart of a world remade, a paradise forged by courage, hope, and the music of unity. And as the dawn brightened, their song joined the chorus of Arden, echoing forever in the living paradise they had created, together. That's the end of the story. You can leave us a tip or become a channel member. This greatly helps our team improve the quality of our videos. You can send a tip using the Super Thanks button right below the video. We truly appreciate each and every one of you who has subscribed and supported us. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.